Good evening. This is the October 12th Public Safety Building Committee meeting. We do have a quorum. I know Mr. Wood will not be here tonight. I do expect Ms. Cook. First order of business is approval of the meeting minutes from September 18th and September 25th. Are there any comments from the committee?
Comprehensive, they're precise, and more often than not, it's a thankless job, but I wanted to thank you, John, for doing it.
Echo Mr. Rooney's comments. So with that, I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as presented from September 18th and September 25th.
I can second the 18th. I cannot participate in the 25th.
Someone that can second both? I guess you're going to abstain on one of them. So, all right, let me withdraw that motion. Make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from September 18th.
Second.
Mr. Rooney is seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Continue with the motion to approve the meeting minutes from September 25th, 2017 as presented. Is there a second on those, the 25th? I think all were here except for Mr. Moorhead, Mr. Rooney, so is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Berry, thank you. Is there any discussion on those minutes? All those in favor? All those opposed?
Abstain.
Those abstaining? All right, so motion carries with the exception of Mr. Rooney, Mr. Moorhead abstaining. Next item on the agenda, Chairman's report. First item here is out-of-scope proposals. There's some proposals that are in front of you that are follow-on from the last meeting. I think in the interest of better comprehending what's in front of you, I think we should move those to later in the meeting just so Jeff can give his design update, because some are directly related to changes that he has had to make based on testing, et cetera. So I'll hold on that item for now. On Monday, the 16th, the Planning Board, as promised, has added an item to their agenda to discuss the traffic study in what they would require on submission of our notice of intent related to a traffic study and exactly what they want it to include. I have posted a public meeting for us. I have posted for 8:30. They do have some scheduled hearings in front of us, so there's no saying exactly how long those will go, so I wasn't going to post at the start of their meeting. So I will be there to the extent any other committee members want to join. You're more than welcome to, but the main thing is to hear them discuss in a public forum, which they have not been able to do yet in a public meeting, and then bring that back to our consultants to make sure that their submission aligns to what the Planning Board outlined so that there is no confusion on the matter. Any questions on that item? The next item is public information session. We had talked about this a while ago. I've been trading notes regularly with Vertex in Context because ultimately we need them to have kind of final plans. We don't want to go with kind of a half-baked solution. And I think while we're getting there, I had originally intended to do that tonight. We obviously did not advertise for that tonight on purpose because there's still decisions being made. So it is my intent at our next meeting on the 2nd of November that at the beginning of the meeting, so we'll start at 6 as opposed to 6:30, that would be a public information session where we'd specifically send notice to the abutters that will be receiving notification from the Planning Board as well. But we would also post it publicly for any interested community member that wants to hear the plans before we go out for the next costing exercise. So that would be first item on our agenda. Are there any questions or comments related to that? It will be here, yes. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff. I don't know, I had kind of targeted in the agenda certain items. I don't know if you want to do it that way, or you just want to try to cover off everything with your slide. I'll defer to you on how you want to.
I don't happen to have a copy of the agenda, but let us go through the presentation,
Okay,
and then if we miss anything in your agenda, just point it out.
sounds good.
Thank you. All right, so you have in front of you a 11 by 17 package of drawings. Behind you is on the screen are the same things. The first thing I'll say, I guess, is to catch you up, saying we did have a working group meeting today. We went over this same presentation, and I think we got some feedback, which was good. Prior to that, last week, I think it was, we had a conference call with engineers on our design team, as well as engineers that the town has hired as part of another project to talk about utilities, bringing utilities into the building site, extending public utilities to the site, and traffic study and other things that are going on. So, and that, I think, helped coordinate the town staff and their engineers with the project team. So that was a good occurrence. The other thing that's happened is that the survey and the civil engineer have now progressed more on the site plan. So the first drawing that you're looking at is a site plan with the same type of coloring that we used to use for our architectural drawing, but now this is being really produced by the civil engineer. So some things have been tweaked. You'll see that the entry at Courteville Road has been tweaked a little bit. They're trying to import civil design standards here that will continue to tweak some things. The other thing that they've done is started to work out rough grading of the site. So you'll note that for the most part, there are no retaining walls on the site, with the exception of the driveway at the top of the page going up to the golf course parking lot, which is kind of dashed in. There's a heavy line on the outside of that road that indicates a retaining wall. It pretty much goes from about 1 foot above grade up to a high point of about 8 feet above grade because of the slope of the hill in that direction and the pitch of the road. We can't have the road, going up too steeply at any one point in time. So that is essentially the reason that wall is there. Everywhere else, they're right now able to accomplish the grades with sloping the landscape, which, we'd like to eliminate all retaining walls, but for cost reasons, but, just having one on this side is, I think, a good thing. The other important thing, which we talked about in the working group ahead of this meeting, was to determine the surface of and this is required for the planning board submission, which will be due on the 23rd of October. Is to determine what the surface of the golf course parking lot and driveway, the driving surface would be, whether it would be asphalt paved with structured drainage or at least piping leading to the drainage basins, or crushed stone and other types of open infiltration. Previously talking to town staff and Mark Purple, it sounded like the town would be prepared and is sort of expecting that crushed stone is the way to go for here. But I think, unless we hear otherwise, that's sort of the way we want to go, but I'd leave it to your committee to direct us one way or the other on that. We can do it with asphalt, obviously be spending more money, a little bit more money on the drainage, but I think for the application process, we need to tell them which way we're going to go. And so those are pretty much the site plan maneuvers that we've done. I'll get into a little bit on the septic, because we did have a little bit of a change there. We had a field located originally as part of the original design back early in the year, the schematic design. That field, as you may remember, it's not shown on the plan, but it's sort of off to the right below the green that's located there. That field was located because of a number of factors. Number one being the approximate location of the wetlands buffer zone, the 200-foot buffer. At that point in time, we had an approximate location, not an actual location. But that limited where it could go. The placement of the future 9th green also limited where it could go, because we didn't want to put it in that 9th green area. And the proximity to proposed drainage basins for the project also limited where it could go. So it pretty much landed in that one spot because of those factors. At the time, as you may remember, the Board of Health agent did express concerns about the types of soils on the site and the propensity of them to drain properly. Subsequently, we have done testing as part of our contract to do percolation tests there in that area. That was about, 3 weeks ago or so. Those tests came back and wasn't really a good area to put the septic field in because of the high groundwater, which is not necessarily something we were expecting. We were expecting problems with the soils, but not necessarily high groundwater. There was also another complication, and that is once the wetlands buffer was actually surveyed, the flags were installed and it was actually surveyed, it did change slightly, which made a corner of that septic field out of bounds. So we would have had to move it slightly anyways, but it was really the high groundwater that was the issue. So after we learned that, we quickly called the contractor involved in doing the testing, asked if they could reschedule for additional testing once we located an alternative site for the septic field. We did locate that alternative site in consultation with the Board of Health agent and located test pits. They were able to reschedule quickly enough that we were able to do the test pits today. And Jason referred to it earlier, but that is one of the out of scope, I think you're calling it, contract pieces that we're gonna wanna talk about. But those new test pits were not part of the original scope. They were additional pits and were required for us to determine if this new location was going to meet the requirements for a septic field. And the tests came back today, positive, everything is good to go. We have soils in that location that are about the best you can have on this site, according to Paul Pinsky. We are in a location, and I'll point to it on the screen here, that's approximately in this region right here. And what that does, and you can see the existing septic is labeled right here, and that's where that field is. So we're pretty close to the existing septic, and we knew that the existing septic field had relatively good soils for the site, so we were confident that was going to be, or likely going to be, a good place for it, so I'm glad we were proved right. The complication is the drainage basins that we now show pretty close to that. There's one right at the bottom of the plan there, now have to be altered. And so the engineers are in the process of altering that and finding out how they can restructure the site. They've told us that they don't think that this restructuring will really add any costs, but it is different engineering that they were originally expecting. But the good thing is, I think we found a location for the septic field and we don't have to do any more testing for it. So that's probably the biggest piece of site news that we had to share. There are several other more minor things we wanted to talk about in terms of the site, one of which is, I think we can handle with the staff, is to determine that the Woodward School actually has electrical capacity to handle the expansion of the pumps needed for the septic field. And all we need, we're gonna work with Mark on that and get him our requirements, and he'll find out whether or not the school has that capacity in it, and hopefully it does. We do have to replace the pumps that are there for this field. I don't know exactly at this point whether we'll have to replace the chambers that are there, but we may have to augment them as well. So there will be a little bit of work as part of our project in this region here where the septic pump stations are. And of course, pathways, pipeways to get to it. Second of all, we did look at the what is the parking thing? Yeah, the other parking thing. Never mind. So the other piece we want to talk about is the buffer zone between the public access and the emergency access driveways. Originally, this had our concept for this, although I don't think it was explicitly shared with you, is this could be a planted area, fairly nice landscaping that would separate the two driveways and provide some color, particularly around the Coralville Road area. In talks with our civil engineer, they believe that in order to satisfy the Conservation Commission and the drainage requirements there, we're likely to need to make that buffer strip, which is about 7 feet wide or so, function and a drainage capacity, which means that we have a couple of options, but neither one gets us a nice floral-looking thing. It's mostly going to be either low plantings, grasses, and a drainage swale, which is essentially a low drainage. It's not really a ditch because it's not that low, but it's sort of a depression, and it would run the length of the buffer. Or we would do what's called a rain garden, which means we could put in some more different types of plantings in there, which might add a little bit more color, but it's certainly not going to be what you would consider to be a landscaped area. It's going to be more functional. And obviously, we can get into technical details later on about how we can keep traffic from crossing over the median, especially in the wintertime. How do we deal with plows and things like that? But in terms of the basic overall picture, I think we're talking about something that's a little bit more spare. One of the things we do have to discuss with the engineer is what happens with the building sign at the Corderville Road intersection. Is there any room around that area to do any low plantings, which may still provide some color? But for the majority of it, it looks like this whole section is going to be, essentially functional. So that, I just wanted to share with you in case there was concerns that, it was a significant change from what your thoughts were about how the site would look. And then finally, because of the impact of the roadways into the Choate Field area, and there's an existing fairly mature tree stand that runs along that road, we are going to have to take down a majority of those trees as part of this project. There is a few that we could keep, but the complication is that trees that grow next to other trees tend to not grow limbs where there are other trees, or at least they don't grow leaves on those limbs. So if we take the trees down around it, you're not going to end up with a nice specimen tree. You're going to end up with something that's a little scraggly looking and maybe not be very attractive. So we still have to evaluate a couple of trees, but the possibility exists there's maybe one or two in this corner we could keep, which are fairly large, but the remainder of them look like they have to come down, or that we may want to take them down. Whether or not we come back and plant new trees on the edge of our thing to essentially recreate a buffer is certainly something we can do as part of this. But in terms of saving the trees that are there, I think we have to assume that most of them probably are going to want to come down. There will be some along here that we can potentially augment with new trees and keep, because of that parking extent, some of those will come down as well. So I think that's the scope of the site plan comments. Is there any questions about that?
On the septic, Jeff, the new location, is that going to save on construction costs, be neutral, or be more expensive?
I would consider it neutral at this point.
And how does that improve or create more challenges to continued golf course operations?
I don't think it creates a challenge. It may determine that, there's maybe a chunk here of the 9th green area that, and essentially this area is where the 9th green could go. It's going to be a much smaller area than that entire circle is defining. So they may not be able to put it in this zone here. They may have to move a little further away because they don't want to put the green above the septic field. So it may impinge on it a little bit, but I really don't think it's going to be a detriment to their operational areas.
But that's something
They'll still be
you
able to
would,
drive golf carts over it, and they'll have pathways over it, and it'll still function.
I guess I was more talking about the site work that would be needed, right? If we're not now in the middle of the fairway with a septic field,
Oh, sure, yeah.
We're now
current
closer.
operations. Yeah, no, it's definitely an improvement to the possibility that they could play golf without the project interrupting, having a big construction site in the middle of the 9th hole. So, I think it's actually an overall benefit.
so by our next meeting, you would be able to accurately define where that septic field would go so that they can get their landscape team
Yep.
thinking about that 9th green.
Absolutely.
Jeff, do you know the finished floor elevation that we're talking about for the,
The
for
building,
the
our new
building?
building?
I guess compared to the street?
Yeah, so right now it's we're thinking it's around 285 and a half feet, which we are going to approximately have a 5% grade from Coralville Road up to the apparatus bay. And we typically want to avoid anything 6 or over for fire truck purposes. So we're close. It's steep for fire trucks, but it's not an issue. We want to keep the building as high as we can to limit the amount of cost we're spending on retaining walls and manipulating grade on the backside of the site. But the higher that we make the building, the more steep we make the driveway up to it. So it's a balancing act. And right now, that's where we've kind of struck the line. If we wanted to reduce it, I think we would start adding to walls on the backside of the site. So I think we tried to strike the most economical way to do it and still be able to have good emergency response.
So we're 285 for the floor, but do you know what the intersection is? Height-wise?
I don't know if we can see
Elevation.
that on our drawings. Do you have it on the survey? Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
It's probably, what, about 300 feet? It might be 15 feet, it might be
15 feet or so.
270.
Can't read them on here.
What did you, how many? 13, yeah,
13
probably somewhere around there, yeah, because 5% is 5 feet every 100. So it sounds about right. Any other site plan questions? Okay, the next drawings, there's 3 of them. They illustrate 3 concepts for the entry landscaping around the entry part of the building. Things to pay attention here are where the crosswalk and pathway is from the parking lot and handicap parking specifically to the front door, and the position of the flagpole memorial elements that are being relocated from the existing fire station, police station site. So the first option is more rectilinear shapes. It has plantings around the face of the building and some ornamental trees. And the flagpole is fairly close to the entry. The second option is more curvilinear, has circle areas, essentially a plaza around the entry, and still keeping the flagpole and memorial close to the entry. And the third one is quite a bit different. It moves the crosswalk and the pathway further down, so it's more halfway between all of the public parking spots. It's more at the midpoint. And it pushes the flagpole and memorial elements closer out to the circular part of the drive. This is most closely related to our original concept. The first 2 are a departure from that, and the primary reason is that the handicap parking spots need to be in a relatively level pitched area of the site, so we can't move them a whole lot from where they are. The concern we had was that in the previous 2 schemes that anybody parking and coming to the building may not choose to walk all the way over to where the pathway is. They might just cut straight across the lawn. One suggestion, which it's not illustrated here, is that that median strip in this area, which is no longer a drainage area, could be landscaped with low hedges or shrubbery that would prevent or at least limit the amount of access people have to cross that emergency drive. And so that may actually help force people to go to the walkway, but we know that, people are, see the door and want to go straight to the door. So we wanted to recognize that, at least in the third option. Is there any of these that you guys prefer over the others at this point? I think we tend to prefer option 2 or 3 over number 1, just, professionally, but curious for your comments. Not really. The amount of plantings is roughly the same. We've just put them in different areas. So some of them, in the first 2, they're more around the building, and in the third one, they're closer to the around the flagpole area. John Lyons earlier brought up the point, and I think it's a good one, that if we are going to have a significant amount of lawn area, that planning for and building into the project an irrigation system is probably a requirement in the project. just because of the amount of grass that we're gonna end up having on this site. Any other comments, preferences?
You need a vote on that?
We don't need any votes. Feelings would be fine. I mean, if nobody says anything, we're probably just gonna do the one that we like the best, but it's up to you guys.
I feel good about 3, right?
I like 3, I like 2, so, you know, I just prefer them more than number 1.
I think I would favor 3. I like the way 3 flows.
Okay. Great. Only if you want to. I mean, if it sounds like 3 is the way to go, that's the direction we'll head in. I mean, there's more work to be done, so this isn't voting on anything final here. It's just a direction to go in, so we'll go in this direction. In terms of the building plans, there's not a whole lot of change from what you had seen before. It's pretty much working the way we want it to. We're now in the process of working with our building MEP engineers to integrate their components and the structural components of the project. And as we move forward with that, there will be some minor tweaking here or there for column grids and shaft space and electronics and things like that. But for the most part, this seems to work. I should actually point out, I failed to mention this in the earlier meeting, but on the first floor, at the main entry, we've now made the vestibule perfectly symmetrical between the 2 wings. You probably didn't pick up on it before, but it was not quite symmetrical before. So you can see in that vestibule area there that it does stick out a little bit further to the right, so that as you look at the building, it matches both sides. So with that extra space there, what we ended up doing, since we didn't need to make the vestibule any longer the same size as the lobby, because that's the way it was, we decided that in the lobby, it'd be better as you entered to have more of the display cases on either side of you, flanking as you came in. So for, you know, memorial things, artifacts from both departments, patches, things like that, those would be displayed in that area, and then it would take you further into the lobby. So that was a change to the plan. On the, there's no changes to the right-hand side of the building. On the second floor, we did change the main entrance lobby to the administration of the police department, and the position of the elevator and the access point in the police department to the fitness room. So basically, this center section here was reconfigured so the police department can have direct access in the back to the gym. The officers no longer have to go through this public lobby to get to the gym, and the public lobby still works. So in the elevator, you're, as a member of the public, you're let off here directly opposite the police department entry. Or if you did come up the stairs, you would still be in this same zone and can go directly to the police department there. The fire department pretty much remains the same on the other side. And then no changes to the loft area and the apparatus bay. So moving on to the exterior of the building, we, again, looking closer at the main entry, this is a small suggestion that we had, and that is supporting the canopy. We've always talked about these columns, and we started thinking, you know, maybe one way we could change that, you know, to simplify it or maybe even reduce some cost a little bit, is to actually support the canopy from the facade of the building. And so it would have diagonal rods or cables that would support the canopy and no longer need the columns. We clean things up on the plan, especially in the wintertime, nothing to kind of shovel around or, you know, blow the snow around. It would eliminate foundations, so there's a little bit of cost savings, maybe a cleaner look. Seemed like the working group preferred this, but again, this is another thing I'm sort of throwing in your court to see if you have a preference one way or the other as far as which way we would go. I think I tend to like the one without columns.
Is there any feedback to the contrary on that? So option B? Mike?
The first plan looks like the supports are disproportionately skinny and small.
Yeah.
I think if you go up, you look better.
Great. We also included three-dimensional views of the rest of the building. We did have some discussion, if you're looking at the front facade in the working group, about the triangular portions of the peaks of the gable ends of each of the three main gables, one above the entranceway and the two flanking that, as to what would go there. Working group, some members of the group felt like there was some empty space there, or some things just didn't work out right, and maybe some more design effort needs to be spent there. So we talked about options. Right now, we're showing louvers, circular louvers there that may or may not actually be needed functionally, but definitely could be something there aesthetically to fill up the space and sort of make an accent point. So we talked about ideas like a clock, a town seal, fire or police department insignias, whether it's made out of synthetic materials or something called cast stone, which looks kind of like a limestone. It's a cementitious concrete-based product. So those are all sort of options on the table. We also talked about, privately actually with the chiefs, running a band, another band across here, in the masonry that would help further delineate the differences in the building and segment that upper part. So we're gonna develop some options for you to look at that explore some of those maneuvers. Nothing for you to decide right now, but unless you absolutely love or don't love anything, you can tell me that. But we're gonna develop some options that look at that and then bring that back to our next meeting. The other facades here are simply ones you've probably already seen. And then we did include the back of the building and the other side, the police wing, which are views that you really haven't seen yet, at least in the models that we've been showing you, because we've been focusing on the front of the building. But these are important views, especially because you will see this building from all sides. The back view here is shown from the perspective of someone standing up on the golf course parking lot, looking at the building. So you actually have some elevation here, and in fact, you can actually see the second floor windows in the gym above the flat roof section of the building. Obviously, there will be some mechanical equipment that will be up there as well, which you will see. There's some roof access by both departments that will be up there. And there'll be the machinery in the back of the building, the emergency generator, and some other stuff. And we talked about whether or not we would like to put some windows in the Sally Port, which is this blank wall right here in the back, which they take prisoners in through, detainees in through, and maybe windows that were, 7 feet high or something, where it's above somebody's head height that they're bringing into the building, so it couldn't be essentially used as a weapon or anything that anybody could hurt themselves on, but it would still let light into that room, which probably would be appreciated. So that's one suggestion there. And then on the next facade, this is the police side of the building, and what you're looking at is the police garages on the left, the patrol area wing that sort of sticks out in the middle with the gable roof, and then on the right side of the building, on the first floor, the community room, and then the upper floor is the police administration. Above the garages is the men's locker room, so that's why the windows are up high, and then above the gable roof of the patrol area is the detective space. So clearly, detectives, because of that roof, don't necessarily get larger windows. So we're looking at how to get a little bit more light into that space, whether we group more windows together, so instead of just having one here and one here, maybe there's a series of windows that gets more light in there. But because of the technical difficulties of putting a roof right there, we really can't have normal-sized sill height windows there, just because of the height of the roof and snow and things like that. So that's essentially what we're looking at for the back sides of the building. And then the last few pages are the elevations of the building, which are less interesting to look at, but more technical drawings. That's the end of our PowerPoint presentation, but we did bring materials with us, which I think probably many of you saw as you came into the room. And those represent choices that we were looking at for the building. And I don't know if it's helpful to I don't know how sure to do it in this format, how to go up and look at them. I can sort of pick them up and show you.
I guess, what are you looking for this committee to give you direction on tonight?
So the reality is, we kind of want some direction about what color brick and whether we should plan to use granite or cast stone for the facade. And I will tell you right now, there is no reason why we can't do our first cost estimate with costing both granite and cast stone. And you can get the price differences, and you can decide once you know the numbers. Granite's gonna be more expensive, but if you know your answer already, you can tell me now, we don't even have to go through the exercise, but cast stone, will be cheaper than granite, definitely. So the way we had, envisioned the building is that the base, that lighter color on the bottom, would be either a granite or a cast stone base, and cast stone is essentially a man-made material. There's some samples of it over here. It can have different textures on it. It can be smooth, like sand texture. It can be a very rough face. You can have different colors. Most of them are earth tones because it's, man-made, but earth material-based product. And so we're generally looking at tans or buffs, cream colors. And so we'd have that on the bottom, and then we'd have the thin band that runs around the middle of the building. That would be the same cast stone material. And then the cornice line of the flat roof areas would be the same cast stone, as well as the lintels above the windows. We also think that the vertical panels below the windows at the apparatus area and the tower should be the same cast stone, maybe in a different color. And we thought doing there in a different texture might be nice to activate the facade, give a little bit more visual interest with some shadows. A much more rougher texture will cause interesting shadows in those panels during the day, and that may help the facade pop a little bit better, but not have to do anything like making the whole, we were originally thinking of glass in those areas, and that didn't really fit with the function, and was going to be more expensive. So this cast stone material would work well in those bands, and we're thinking, giving it some more texture would actually be beneficial. So the areas where we'd be thinking about granite is really that bottom base, where you'd have the base, and then the cap, the little thin piece above it, would be the parts where we would be thinking of using granite. Everything else above that, we'd probably use cast stone regardless, just to keep the cost down a little bit, and also because the base could be delineated as a completely separate material, and it would work still with the rest of the design. The only decision, I guess, beyond that is what color brick we want to use. And I'm going to hold up the brick because I think it's easier to see them. So these two brick panels, one is a tan and the other one is red brick, obviously, are representative of, I guess, the two ways we could go. The tan or buff brick can be done in many different colors beyond this, but generally it's going to be in the gray to tan to buff color range, again, because of the material it's made out of. But it's a modular brick, which means it's machine-made, it's very uniform, crisp edges, it has a very uniform look to it. The building ends up being a very uniform thing. The red brick you can also get in modular, so you can still have that uniform look. But we prefer the water-struck brick, which is what this is. It has a more irregular shape because it's water-struck, and the way they fire it ends up having these darker spots. Some of them can be darker than this, but this is a lighter flat. It's called flashing in the brick, and so it creates a mottled look at the facade, and it's obviously very irregular depending on how the bricks went through the kiln, which means once you get a whole facade of it, it's a really interesting looking thing. It's not a very uniform facade, even though from a distance it looks just like red brick. I mean, you're not going to, it doesn't look like it's distorted or anything, but when you get close of it, it has a distinctive character. We assumed, and sort of that's why we colored it red, we assumed that we were doing a red brick building, but we thought we'd want to give you the option of exploring other colors, or just to rule out other colors, just to make sure that there wasn't any scenario in which we would entertain a different than red colored building. So, I mean, I think that's safe to say. If you want to make a decision about that today, it seems like something that is relatively painless to do. But if you were interested in doing more explorations of the buff colors of bricks, there are others we can bring and look at, but they'll look similar to this. The color might change, they'll look similar to that though.
So this will sit next to Woodward, right? So.
Yes, and Woodward has a red color on the bottom and a buff cream tan color on the top. It's sort of dual, two colored building. Ours, we're recommending we do one color brick and not this dual thing. We did actually do an exercise where we did two colors in the design and looked at it and said, it's so close to Woodward, we look like we're trying to copy their building. And it won't look like a cousin, it'll look like a twin. And it really shouldn't look like that. It's a completely different building, even though it's a town building, it's completely different. So I think it should deserve its own look, but still staying within the brick look.
Any thoughts from the committee?
I prefer the red, but I'm just wondering, when we're talking about the brick, do either of these have an issue of wicking and absorbing water and causing issues like condensation and water infiltration?
So the way we will build this building, and just about every building these days, is that it's not solid masonry from front to back. There's actually what's called a masonry veneer. It's just one brick thickness deep. And behind that is an air space, a cavity. And then you'll have insulation, you'll have a water barrier, vapor barrier, and then you'll have the framing, the wall framing, whether it's masonry or like CMU blocks, or whether it's steel framing. So there actually is really no chance for water to go all the way through into the building unless there's a construction defect. It's not designed that way. The water's supposed to wick out of the facade through weeps in the wall design. It's called cavity wall design. That's intended to have a cavity in it that will actually drain water that gets into the wall. Now, the way that the brick is intended to be installed is with full bed mortar joints and fully installed brick. So there really isn't holes for water to get through, but water vapor can pass through the brick itself. It is porous in that sense, and also the mortar. Actually, it passes through the mortar easier. So given pressure differential and temperature, water can be forced through the brick, particularly heat, solar drive. It will drive the moisture into the wall, but the vapor barrier inside the wall will keep that moisture from coming into the building. So in general, it can go through, water vapor can go through, but the drains inside the cavity are there to wick it out and to keep it from malfunctioning.
So it doesn't matter what kind of brick we use?
Doesn't matter what kind of brick we use, no.
So your recommendation is the red brick?
We would prefer to do the red brick, yes.
There's no cost difference between the two?
Very slight, not enough to make a difference, really.
And Jeff and John, how do we write our specs so we can keep it tight enough so that we can
We specify water struck brick.
stay with what we pick? I know, but we want that one, right?
Yeah.
So how do we
Yeah.
get there?
Yeah.
Probably get 3 colors just like this submitted.
Yep.
Mhm.
We'll pick from that one, which one looks the best shade.
Right.
Yeah. Generally, brick is such a commodity almost that the mason, the only reason he cares is because he has relationships with certain distributors. And so they either carry more in brick or they carry a different kind of water struck brick. And there's not that many water struck bricks out there. So more than likely, we'll get whatever we want, but we won't specify it. We won't have a sole source specification. We have to have an open spec, and we will. But generally, the masons are pretty good about, especially with Morin. I mean, they're pretty close. They're Maine, so it's not that difficult to get. We will specify something that's generally in the same price range, so there won't usually be a concern about the mason saying, well, that's going to cost X number of dollars more to get that brick. So we haven't really had a problem when we specified water struck brick of getting the right ones, or at least even when they're really not able to do it, they've been able to get an equivalent looking brick that we're comfortable going with whatever it is that they ended up submitting, that it's good enough essentially for us.
When we get closer, if we narrow this down, will we have a mock-up?
definitely. We will have one during construction. So that's probably an important point. We will specify the contractor has to build a mock-up for a number of reasons, one of which is to finalize the choice for all the various materials. So particularly when you talk about cast stone, because the various colors it can come in, we may actually have the mock-up have 2 or 3 different colors of cast stone on it so we can finalize our final choice. There's no cost difference. It's just a matter of what do we want. And it's much easier to pick when you can see, you know, a 4 by 3 foot area that rather than one 6 by 6 sample in a artificially lit space. And then with brick, we may end up, you know, wanting to look at different colors of mortar on the wall to see which goes best with the different brick types. But that will happen during construction, at the beginning of construction typically.
Question. Jeff, I spoke to one of the committee members in Westboro when they built the Westboro Fire Station, which was built last year. And they have a very similar composition in the front, but in the back where nobody sees it, they used all stucco and they painted it to match the front. And I asked them why they did that, and I guess there was a rather large savings economically. So I don't know if that's something that, what you feel like about it, or, and it wasn't part of the working group, but.
I think there's reasons to assume in our project, we have kind of like a 360-degree building. It's gonna be hard to find a piece of the facade that we can call the back of house that nobody can
Yeah.
see. So if we change materials, I think it'll be quite obvious what we've done. Even if we tried to paint it out like it is the same, it would kind of look like, well, they cheaped out over there. Now, yeah, we did, of course, and we did it for a reason, to save money. But I do think there is a durability question when you're using something like a stucco product. It's not the same type of building that you're getting with a masonry type building. So if you do choose to change materials, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you've now downgraded that part of the
Section.
building. And you may end up be facing with more maintenance or potential problems that you have to fix earlier than you would anywhere else in the rest of the building. So it is, in my opinion, a very big concern if we did, and I think the reality is I wouldn't recommend it unless we had such a problem with the budget. That was the only way to value engineer the project to make it work.
Yeah.
And I hope and assume, based upon the way we're going through this process, we won't get to that point. We'll have solved a major problem like that. We'll have solved much earlier than waiting till the end.
It was from what I understand, it was a considerable amount of money, over
Yeah, I'm sure it would be.
$200,000.
You know, it's a considerable difference between constructing something out of masonry than stucco, essentially a drive-it type product. That's one of the cheapest things you can put on the side of a building.
Yeah.
So,
But the durability is a big factor, I think, for me
Yeah.
and everybody, I
yeah.
think.
So is there any other commentary related to exterior materials?
You looked at glass for the whole entire bay of the fire station?
We looked at glass for those vertical bands.
Yep.
And because of what they're facing, it just wasn't appropriate. And we end up spending a lot of money for something that, you know, doesn't really get the,
Little slivers. right?
I mean, the functionality of the glass. I mean, aesthetically it might look nice, but the functionality is missing. And unless you can get the total package, I don't know that I can justify spending the money on it.
When you have so much glass for the doors already.
Yeah, now that's another consideration. We're currently assuming all glass doors, and I mean, we could certainly add opaque panels to it. I like all glass doors because it kind of shows off the town's investment in the equipment that it has. It also clearly signifies fire station. So that's why we tend to use them. We have developed, you know, specifications that now look at glass doors that are a little bit less heavy, because we're going less, we used to use fully insulated, you know, 1-inch thick insulated glass. Those were super heavy doors, and it burned out motors, it burned out springs. There was so much maintenance required with it. So we've gone down essentially in the insulated value of our glass doors, picked different products to get lighter weight products so that the maintenance on the long term isn't as much. So you are suffering an energy penalty, but the maintenance penalty has gone down significantly. So there are still products we can use that still give you an all-glass look that don't have quite as much maintenance as we had in the past.
I know somewhere in the planning, when we met with the neighbors, that there was a concern about the doors in the back being glass and the light going
The
through.
doors in the back, we're gonna make
Be Solid
more-
doors, or?
mostly solid in the back. It's either gonna be, 2 panels or 3 panels of glass in the back, but mostly solid.
Okay.
You have significant grades still to help you
That's true.
shield.
There'll be, the parking lot in the back will help.
Tree line is
And
pretty,
then there'll be the tree line there. Obviously in the wintertime, the trees don't have as many leaves on them there, but we're hoping we're planning that grade of the back, when the headlights shine out, that grade will cut off the headlights, and that won't shine up into the neighbors. And the site lighting that's here will have cutoff shields on it, so it won't go beyond the property line, so they won't have lights spill over into neighboring properties either.
Any other questions for Jeff? Jeff, did you have anything else for us?
I think that was it. I'm just looking through your list here. I think generally that was it with our presentation, and what kind of we wanted to update you with.
So I guess just looking at our agenda to make sure we touched on everything. I mentioned the discussion we're gonna have with planning on Monday night, but can you just update the full committee on at least what's in process, in terms of the traffic study and what's already been done,
Sure.
just so that everyone's on the same page?
No problem. So, as we discussed, or I mentioned, we had a conference call last week with the town's separate traffic engineer that's doing right now in process of the traffic study. And essentially that is a traffic count and an analysis that determines whether a signal is warranted at this location. And that's in process. That will be complete for our application, which the application is next, it's actually the 23rd of October. The application, planning board is due. So that'll be done. What may not be done, we were having discussions in the working group about it, is the next step. And that is determining, and I'll switch back to the site plan, but determining how the public access drive functions. Currently, we're planning on it being a two-way driveway. And we're currently planning on a connection to the Woodward School part of the property. But we have to submit to the planning board a site plan that shows what our intent is, what our engineering design is, and how we're dealing with stormwater, as well as the traffic concerns. The traffic study assumes this connection and has done the counts to assume it, and has, I think, concluded that a light is actually not necessary from a traffic standpoint in terms of number of trips through here. It may still be warranted from a public safety, but that's not necessarily a requirement from the planning board. That's our own internal desire to have a signal for that. But in terms of planning the routing of that public access driveway, whether it's one-way and in which direction, or whether it stays two-way, that analysis really hasn't been done yet. And we talked about it again today as probably being desirable to have this consultant do that work. I think the bigger question is, will that actually be able to be done before we submit our planning board application on the 23rd? And if it's not done, given what we heard from the planning board is wanting a complete application, 100%, are we wanting to bring that forward to them if we don't know for sure if this is going to stay a two-way drive or a one-way drive? And if it's one-way, which way does it go? I mean, that's a fairly big question to leave hanging. So I think that's probably needs some discussion. I know Jason's going on Monday to talk to them, and I'm sure they'll have an opinion about it as well. If we did wait, we would essentially be pushing everything back a month in terms of our application. I think we have room in the schedule to accommodate that, and still continue with our design work on schedule, and it just sort of pushes more into the back end of the design work. But we want to be careful about presenting things the right way to the planning board. And as much as we want to keep moving forward as quickly as possible, we also don't want to make any wrong turns. So that's where we are, and I think we're going to get some information about how quickly that piece of information could be delivered to us, whether it could actually be done before the 23rd and incorporated into our submission. Obviously, if that's true, we'll continue and absolutely do the submission on the 23rd, but if not, we probably need a game plan.
So I am a strong advocate of not delaying that submission, and I think we have to find a way to get that done. And I think the DPW director owes an answer back tomorrow.
Right.
On what it's going to take, but I don't know that, I agree, we have to submit a complete package, but I think given all the work that has gone into this, to have that be our hiccup of why we delay this a month is crazy. So I think you just have to get the work done.
Yeah.
We've known about this. We've had discussions about this for at least a month, if not longer. So I don't know where the responsibility falls, but I think hopefully we get a good answer tomorrow and this is a non-issue. But I think we need to drive for a complete package and on the 23rd.
Yeah.
So we satisfy all parties.
Yeah, from our
Desires.
perspective, the public safety needs are being solved with a two-way driveway. That's how we've always planned it. That's how it would work if we didn't make a connection to Woodward. The whole thing is kind of being driven by this connection to Woodward, and now, you know, kind of meshing up with what their needs are. So, you know, my understanding is that the traffic consultant is the best individual to handle it, to determine sort of as a third party how the traffic needs should be deciphered. And I'm not necessarily sure how much time they need to do that. I think it's probably a combination of what they're currently doing and how much actual work it takes, whether it's simply an analysis and then that information is fed back to our civil engineer and they can change the drawing, and that shouldn't take a lot of time, or if the traffic engineer has to do some sort of extensive study, which I can't see as, I mean, I don't see it, but again, I think we just have to wait and see what Karen
Okay.
feeds back.
So we'll have that answer tomorrow,
Yeah, sounds like,
so that I'm armed with the right information for Monday.
yeah.
But what's unknown and what wouldn't we stand for? I mean, I think we could take the two-way street and we could take a traffic light. Is there anything that's unknown that we wouldn't want as part of our building?
I think the only unknown is simply just what do we want to do about the traffic? Do we want it to be two-way? Do we want it to be one-way? And if it's one-way, which direction does it flow? They're not hard decisions to make.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's just somebody has to actually spend the time studying it. And the traffic consultant is, I think, the ideal
Mhm.
entity to do that. You know,
But specifically with the two-way connection to Woodward,
or a one-way connection to
Right.
Woodward, yeah.
but a connection we've always assumed. I
We
think.
know, I think, at this point.
Yeah, so, okay. Not hard questions, right?
No,
All right. So then, somewhat related to that, we also had the Woodward traffic circle. So, from this perspective, my understanding is that the school committee has been provided with a proposal as part of our project to consider design work for making that cut through a reality, which is
Yes.
why you're showing
A
your
connection.
drawing. You're showing that as a connection.
yeah, and I should also point out, we did change our site plan to show that the golf course driveway does no longer impedes upon the traffic signal. So it could be built without any connection to Woodward at all,
Right.
if we needed to do that.
So I am confident that the school committee took great action since our last meeting and is pushing forward on that, and I think is in the process of looking for how they would fund any construction of that. But I think the plan is to include that in the design because they have a strong desire to loop into our construction schedule, contracting, et cetera. It's obviously outside of our budget, but it's part of our overall design of the plan, which I think leads to a more effective regulatory process. Any questions on that? Utilities extension. So I don't know if you have an update on that or if Vertex wants to.
That was the conference call I explained earlier. We did talk extensively through all of the utility extensions. is what would be needed in the interaction with the Main Street project and who's doing what. I don't know, Steve, do you want to fill everybody in on that in terms of the logistics?
So we had a very productive discussion with Karen and Karen's consultants, and the idea was to figure out a plan, what was the best plan to bring that water down for the public safety up off the Main Street project, and what the timing of that, and what the timing of that would be. So the gist of it is that the Main Street project probably won't be happening fast enough, and the water installation won't be happening fast enough so that it would be there in time for our project. So the conclusion is, and if it isn't, we wouldn't be in much control of that either, and that would be a huge issue for us. So the conclusion, and what Karen was very supportive of, was to have that water line installation bid separately by DPW, and have that be a separate contract let by them, and cost be borne by this project, which is always the plan. So that is what we put in motion, to have it done in that fashion. So that was just the other day's discussion, so I don't know more specifics about timing in terms of, you know, when documents are ready, when it's gonna go out to bid and all that yet, but that's the plan that we discussed. Many variations to that could have happened, like we could have taken all that work into our bid and our documents and had that bid. That is work that will all be in the street, and so all the street type safety things would have to be considered and in that specification, so that all of those discussions ended up with the plan that I described, with that being bid separately by DPW and cost by us.
My understanding is that the town is working with the gas company to extend the gas line, and they would, obviously the gas company would be in charge of that, to coordinate it with the timing of our project as well. The last word with electric supplier was that there didn't need to be much improvements to their service. They would potentially have to string a couple more wires to provide three-phase service to the project, but they wouldn't necessarily have to replace any poles or move any poles. We also understood that the poles recently changed ownership, and they've gone from Verizon to, who's the electric? I keep getting them screwed up, but I think National Grid, who now owns the pole. So they own the pole and the service, which is great, because you know, the coordination will be there when we need it. What's the last one we talked about? That was it. I think that was it.
There's one other piece. Mark had sent me a proposal from PAR, who is somebody that.
Why don't we, John, why don't we wait on that? Just, we're gonna go through all the proposals here in a second. But I think that's a good update on utilities, and I think we have costs potentially on construction as well, rough estimates of where they think it may come back. Any questions on any of that so far? Mr. Rooney?
On the utility discussion, was the inclusion of the services needed for the golf course discussed with the utility companies in terms of the golf course clubhouse and their electrical needs and gas needs? Was that included in the discussion?
Yeah, we, there's an expectation that whatever electrical and gas they may need for their clubhouse building will easily be absorbed
Okay.
within our service we're bringing over, that we don't see a problem with that. The discussion actually focused on water and whether or not there was a need to expand the size of the water service for some need for the golf course to somehow provide irrigation or something like that on their property. And I think at this point, the decision was there was no additional water service beyond simply just a bathroom and maybe a faucet, a garden hose or something like that at the golf course for, you know, a major water project for them. And if that happened to be the case, it would probably be part of a much larger project for the golf course. So that was essentially taken off the table as an item. So the water service is being driven by the flow requirements for our building and the fire protection needs for our building. So it'll be a 8-inch line, fairly robust.
And
service.
in your site, if I can ask another question, in your site plan, you have a lot of items identified, the pole memorial, building sign, et cetera. Is that the clubhouse in the dotted line that you propose to be moved to that location?
Yes, so the
Okay.
clubhouse is shown approximately right here.
Yeah.
And that's because of some of the grading that's going on site and the septic system. And as we get closer to, you know, in these next week or so, closer to a submission to planning board, we'll firm up the location of that a little bit more. But generally, it's gonna be in that area. We are obviously investigating the depth of the basement. Right now, they have a drive-in basement
Right.
for their golf carts. It's not necessarily right on grade, you do have to go down a little bit to get there, so they may end up with a similar situation here, so that we can get them in the front door without significant elevation change as well. Because you have to maintain accessibility, so kind of has to be a sweet spot there, but that looked like a good location.
And I suspect it's too early to talk about sequencing of construction, but I think this project might be a bit unusual insofar as one of the first, at least from my perspective or my thought process, one of the first items that needs to be built or constructed would be the golf course parking area and the exit and entrance into that location.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's probably an unusual phenomenon in this type of a design.
It's not so unusual. We do a lot of phased projects for
Okay.
that type of reason. Logistics, an owner needs to do something first before they can do something second.
Right.
And that's not unusual.
Okay,
But I agree with you that road and parking lot and the golf course, golf house move is definitely a phase one
yes,
of the
okay,
project.
thank you.
I guess while we're on that topic, I heard you say you would like direction on the type of material for that parking lot.
Yes.
So you suggested crushed stone as cheaper and easier to deal with drainage, and obviously just cheaper than asphalt. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there any appetite from this committee to explore asphalt?
I should also point out that they, currently, town does not anticipate needing to plow the lot in the wintertime, which is a big factor in, you know, maintenance of the gravel area. If it was plowed every winter, you'd be replacing a lot of gravel. So that's key.
So before going back to the proposals, I think the last item is you provided a revised schedule. I guess I just had, assuming we keep our submission dates, just looking at the November 2nd meeting, it doesn't mention the public information session that I referred to earlier. That's also the night you're going to get our final approvals to go do cost estimating.
Correct.
And we have on there reviewing pre-qualification RFQ documents. We're never going to get out of here. So I guess what I would like to suggest is finding a way. I know we had moved that up from an earlier schedule. I don't know if there's a way to,
The pre-qual stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, we moved that up. You can certainly move it back. I don't know if Vertex has a suggestion there. We kind of skip from a building committee meeting on the 2nd to the 27th, which is the week after Thanksgiving. I think that was done on purpose because nobody was probably going to be around the week of Thanksgiving, or it's just going to be harder to make decisions that day. But you certainly could do something between those dates.
so if I remember Vertex, when you first were onboarded, you talked about forming a formal subcommittee to deal with this process.
Correct.
My question is, should we form that subcommittee and not have 9 board members sitting around the table dealing with this particular item?
Yes. It needs to be 4 people. It needs to be 4 people. It needs to be 1 from our group, 1 from Jeff's group, and 2 from you. So those 4 people, and the RFP document is statutory. There's very little flexibility. You can, there's points for management experience, project experience, and financial stability. 50 points, 30 points, 20 points. In each of those subcategories, each of those 3 categories has subcategories. You're allowed to move the points around in those, but in the end, it's 50, 30, and 20. That's the extent of the flexibility we have on that document. You all don't need to, I could do that with the smaller group.
And in other communities, I assume a building committee like ours is appointed a subgroup, but you'd be subject to open meeting law and discussion along those lines?
There's really, at the end of the day, we don't meet until till the end. Everybody gets their documents from the subs and GCs, sends me their scores. Typically what we'll do is we'll divvy up, we don't want multiple people calling the same reference checks. So, Context would take some, we would take some.
Typically take the architects, they take the OPMs or the,
Yeah, and
owners
and then we'll
and-
come back and all put this, I'll keep one master score sheet. And at the end of the day, 98% of the people who will submit will be pre-qualified.
So what were you going to accomplish in this November 2nd meeting? I'm hearing 2 different things.
no, it was simply an agenda item to essentially say, these documents are fine, we can put them out to bid as a sort of formal notification that,
So you don't actually anticipate that item being long that evening? It's the process that Mr. Lemieux is speaking about that would take a
we
while.
need that, we needed, essentially, we needed a start date to do that process. So
Okay.
we moved it up in order to get an earlier start date to start that process. I
We
think the
can-
actual agenda item is gonna be, 10 seconds.
What we can do is I can have the RFQ document done with our suggested breakdown of points. Can give it to you and you can disseminate it. I mean, with the understanding that there's not a lot to discuss and debate when we talk about it. It's about the schedule and how does it work with the schedule? The points, are you okay with how they're broken up? But as far as language and those kind of things, we don't have flexibility of making changes and that sort of thing. So it could be 15 minutes at that if people have looked through it prior to the meeting.
So my suggestion is we keep that on the agenda, but also have, I'll have an agenda item to actually appoint those 2 members and have a discussion amongst the committee. That way, they're off and running. It cannot be more than 2, correct? I'm just thinking 3 helps to meet a quorum, but,
I will tell you that that committee to me is not, I wouldn't view that as a public meeting committee. The reason, and I have never to
Okay.
date. There is financial information of those contractors, which is not viewed as public information, which you don't want to be
so I
getting
will
in trouble for
have,
that.
well, I guess what I'll do is I'll reach out to the town clerk for
We never meet.
guidance and have him.
Yeah, I would tell you that there would be no meetings until the end, and I've done it via conference call, typically, with people's time. So if anybody has any questions, we can certainly share the
It
info.
might be an executive session as well, right? So,
Our experiences has simply been, you send out the RFQ, when John gets all the proposals, he distributes them to the 4 people, here's your group, your group, your group. There's no discussion, you just take them, then you start the reference checking, and you return your score sheet back to John, and he tallies it up, and then there's a meeting to just review the results.
Yeah, if the-
Pretty much to check his math?
Yeah.
You can check,
Yeah,
you can
check
check
his
the math, yeah. And also too, if the only hiccups in the process is if we receive submissions back and we don't have 3, you have to go back out to the street one more time, which is why it's good to have extra time for this. And if after a second time out to the street to try to get more firms, you have 2 or less, it's up to you to either go with 2 or less, which I would never recommend, or pull the pre-qualification requirement from the category, and we just bid it as a filed sub-bid category. So,
all right, so I will do some homework on that. I appreciate what other communities do, but there's a lot of optics around this, so
mhm,
I'm going to dot my i's and cross my t's, I think.
whatever you like.
So we'll have the appropriate agenda item next time to deal with that.
And that's November 2nd? Is that what he
Correct.
has? Okay, I don't have the schedule in front of me.
Yeah, it's November 2nd. The schedule looks like this. The 23rd is a working group meeting, and the next building committee meeting is November 2nd.
So I would shoot to maybe have a draft to show you at the working group on the 23rd.
I
And
would
if-
say
and-
just disseminate it to the entire committee to review it ahead of
Soon when
time.
it's done. Okay.
Much like we get documents ahead of time to review, and then we come with our questions and
There'll be
discuss it.
two. There'll be one for the GCs and one for the subs. Very little difference between the two, but there are a couple.
Any questions on the schedule? All right, so back to the earlier agenda item for out-of-scope proposals. So in front of everyone is a stapled package. As you recall, at our last meeting, we had authorized Context to provide us services related to providing a complete site plan, which would incorporate the Woodward Traffic Circle, golf course parking, golf course septic, and moving of the golf clubhouse. Those items will be in here, but my view is just, I'm presenting them just to inform everyone. Mr. Purple did work with bond counsel to make sure that the way that the proposals were submitted are in accordance with how Article 1 was written at town meeting, and that there was no issue with funding it out of the project cost, because quite honestly, we would be facing a very, I think the general view was we would be facing a very long uphill regulatory review if we only kind of went in a siloed package as public safety. This obviously does not guarantee that any of these things will actually happen or be funded, for the future, but there are a lot of things in here already that will just allow for the design to continue. So the first item that's in front of you, and I'm actually going to turn the floor back over to Jeff for a second, is the extra test pits that needed to be dug related to the septic. And this is probably a conversation between you and Vertex, but in your earlier statements, you had stated that the issue with the originally proposed location was the high groundwater and the buffer to the wetlands.
Right.
My understanding, and I could have misunderstood Vertex, is the location in the middle of the golf course passed, but we still have the wetlands concern. Is that?
The location passed for the soils, but the high groundwater was an issue.
Okay.
We did have an issue with the wetlands buffer. We could have moved it, but the groundwater was gonna make it a problematic area to install it.
So for the benefit of everyone, they are proposing a fee of $8,360 to conduct those services. I
And-
guess, I don't know if you want to add any
Yeah.
explanation to that before we ask, kind of Vertex.
So so this second proposal, second test pit, cost is work that has been already undertaken. Part of it's already been undertaken, because as I explained, we want to keep things moving, get the test pit scheduled, to get them going, and that work was done today. They are going to be billing, this is the Geotex invoice to us, or not invoice, but proposal to us, that came in just before they did the test pits. We were recommending that we bill this as a reimbursable expense. Obviously, we had management time to corral this, so there was an additional 10% that would be charged on top of it. I could put this in the format of a proposal. What I felt like the easiest way to go forward is to simply, go forward with the proposal as written plus the 10%, which is, I think, the amount that Jason mentioned.
That's from Ellen's email, so.
Exactly. So that's the total with our 10% on top. And it does include all the stuff they had to do today to get the work done. It included the 4 percolation tests that were required by Board of Health, 3 in the zone. Every time you pick a new septic location, you have to do 3 test pits in that zone, and then you have to pick a reserve area and do 1 test pit there. So as soon as we changed, we had to do 4 more test pits. And that included the soil evaluation as well as the excavation work. So that's essentially what it was for.
So I'll just ask Vertex for some context around that, no pun intended.
So we think that we have the right spot now for the septic system. The other tests showed, while they percolated properly to be acceptable with a high water table, that's certainly a factor. They could have designed the septic system for there, but we think this is a better spot, and the better spot requires the work that was undertaken and is provided with this proposal that, as Jeff said, was most of the work performed today. So we recommend this proposal. We think we're in the right spot for this system for the school, or for the public safety facility and for the school.
Mr. Rooney?
So, don't take this the wrong way, but why should the town have to pay for this? In other words, we were relying on you, at least theoretically, to identify the correct location for the septic system the first go-round.
Right.
And apparently that you've now found a better location.
Yeah.
Can
And
you just explain that to me?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the location would have worked fine, except for the fact that there was high groundwater there, and nobody knew that. And I think the goal originally was to keep the septic field away from the drainage, away from the possibility of interfering with that green area, and away from the potential location of the golf house. With those constraints, and trying to keep it on the same elevation gradient as the current field, this was the best spot that we knew of at the time. And once we found the high groundwater, that essentially killed the deal. And until we actually dug, we didn't know where the groundwater was. So unfortunately, yeah, we would have loved to have hit gold right away, but once you dig, you find what you find. And so it's sort of a circumstance of the site we have. The good thing is that we found a piece of land on our second shot without having to do a third or more. And this process has been done elsewhere and in other projects had to have done multiple rounds of exploring the ground. So I think I'm very grateful that we're only doing this second pit. I would have loved to have never had to have done a second one, of course, but because we didn't know that information, we couldn't have determined that ahead of time.
So this might be a simple question, but when you found the high groundwater the first day, was there no time left to move the equipment over and start looking at a new spot?
It was a number of factors. They can't automatically assume that the first time they see water in the pit, and that's it. So they had to do a little bit more digging to actually sort of figure out what they were dealing with. I think at the time they still wanted to make sure that the soils would pass, because you didn't really know until the engineer kind of put the data together. Could they have kind of gotten out of it with maybe just half a day, if all the stars aligned? Possibly. I think this is a hindsight type question, and going back and looking back and saying, had we only have known, we definitely would have shifted gears and run over there and done some more test pits. But the other question was, where else would it go? Because at the time we were thinking that with the drainage and the golf course location, we kind of had to go back and figure out, okay, what do we have to move in order to find another field area that's plausible? So I don't know that we would have been able to, everything would have had to work perfectly to have accommodated that in that same day of testing.
I mean, I guess my disappointment, right, and I think before we take any votes on this, I think we got to go through all of them just to get the bigger picture. My disappointment in this one in particular is that the Board of Health agent was here a month ago, and he told us exactly where the site was going to be good,
Yeah.
and where it was not going to be good.
But he didn't know where the groundwater was.
But he had concerns
Yeah, he was talking about soils, but
about that area.
unfortunately, we knew we knew generally what the soils look like. And as Steve said, this site would have passed had it not been for the high groundwater. So I think that's really the issue.
I just think the writing was on the wall. If he had given you the wrong information and sat up here and said, oh, go test over there, I wouldn't have that big of a concern. But he stood here, and I believe a member of the Conservation Commission stood here and said, go closer to the building. And we had an extensive conversation about going under the pavement, et cetera, and we talked ourselves out of that for a variety of reasons, right? But I heard you say earlier, Jeff, that moving that drainage basin wasn't that big of a concern.
It wasn't a cost concern, no. It was an engineering puzzle that has to be solved. It was also a move to the golf course house, and it was a potential impact to the ninth green. All of things that, you know, back when we originally located it, were not viable alternatives at that time.
Okay.
So I think if we had gone back to them in January last year and said, well, that's where our septic field has to go, you gotta move your ninth green, I think that may have been more of an issue at that time. So I think the goal at that time was to really keep this out of the golf course and sort of help them find a way to make their course work in order to make the whole project work best together.
But you're contradicting the question I asked you earlier when I said, is this going to make golf course operations easier to continue?
To continue, but in the meantime, once this thing is built, it's not gonna give them the full use of where they wanted to put the ninth green. It's not gonna give them the original location where they sited the golf house. So, you know, in the course of building it, yes, but not long-term.
Okay.
It's gonna be an impact. And I think at the time we were talking about it, there was a lot of concern about any real impacts to the golf operations. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I guess we should have put it there, but I thought we had a pretty good location at the time, and it still passed, and if we had only known about the high groundwater, I think we would have known more.
Mr. Rooney, do you have something?
Looking at the McPhail letter of October 11th, letter of October 11th, which is in the second page, is it fair to say that number 1 has already been done? We already know the location, correct?
Yeah, they've all been done at this point.
Okay.
They were done, other than item 5, which the soil report hasn't been done yet, but pretty much they've all been done as of today.
Okay, and my question is, and again, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but why couldn't you or Vertex have done the supervision of this work in the hiring of the contractor? Why did we have to get McPhail involved?
They are the engineer that is going to be writing the report, that's going to be supervising the work. They're the technical professional, in other words, that essentially is most qualified to do it.
Okay.
You know, we certainly could have hired the site contractor, but frankly, it's not worth, there's not a lot of money there to
Yep, I
pull back.
understand. Okay.
All right, any further discussion on that particular item? All right, so the next one that starts has Pare in the top right-hand corner. This is what Mr. Lemieux started to talk about, and I asked him to hold off a little bit. Maybe I'll ask you to come up, just explain what this is and what Vertex has done to validate the costs here. To be clear, this has absolutely nothing to do, Jeff, with context or any proposals you've given.
Thank you. So this was, this is a proposal that was received, that Mark received, Mark Purple, and forwarded to us to review. This is PAR, who the town already has a open agreement with. Apparently, there's task order work that things come up regarding site utilities, or utilities in town. You go to them because you already have this open, and it's been open for a while. This is their proposed fee for the water main extension, 1,500 linear feet from Corderville Road, and I think from the intersection of Corderville and Main Street up to the public safety building. So this, Jason, at this point, Mark and I never really connected. I reviewed this. I thought the price looked high. at $78,000. It's basically the entire design process for the water main, which at this point, I don't know if we've really decided if it's going to be in the job or out of the job. I mean, have we,
Well, I think from a cost perspective, it's clearly within our $22.6 million.
right, but from a, are we going to build it into Jeff's plans? Or are we going to, which I don't think so. If that's the case, my comment back to Mark was, he was going to have a conversation with someone else, I can't remember who that was, but going back and have them sharpen their pencil a little bit. It just seemed like for work which I heard could be around $500,000 for the, it just seems, you know, that's 15%-ish. Seems like a high fee.
So your recommendation is for us not to take any action on this yet?
I don't think we need to just yet.
Okay.
I think we.
Is this
let's
causing
make
any delays, you think, that you
don't
can
believe so.
foresee? Okay.
No.
Does anyone have any comments on that, or?
Just
Ernie?
so I understand, and again, sorry for the baby steps here, but
No
this
problem.
is the cost, $78,000 to bring the water main from the intersection down to the public safety facility?
Cost for the design,
Just the design?
correct.
And that is not something that our Public Works Department can do with their engineer? They can't do that?
This is their engineer.
This is their,
This
yeah,
is
this
their
is your
en- this is
engineer.
their
Yeah,
engineer.
correct.
This is their third
And
party.
how does this, if at all, interrelate with the construction, the intersection construction? Are they gonna be doing any water main work during that construction?
With our project, the public safety project?
Well, I assume that when they do this, the intersection, they're gonna be doing something, maybe I'm wrong, with regards to the water
So,
underneath the street.
so with Corderville Road in our intersection for our project, they're gonna bring the water line, they're gonna put the T in and bring it onto our property, so that the site contractor that is part of the building project will just pick it up from our property line, which means they don't have to cut into the street, which is great. But that's where we wanna leave it. And I think the understanding I got was that it won't tie in with the Main Street work, the new work, because they're gonna start at a different end of the project and work their way up to this intersection. So at the time that this water line is put in, it'll be connected to the old service, and then the Main Street project will reconnect it to the new service as part of their scope. Well, actually, it's really goes all the way to the intersection, right? I think, because they have to replace a section of line that's undersized, because we're going to an 8-inch line.
And all that work will take months or be done months or years later, after our project needs to have the water line brought. Months.
Yes.
That was part of the phone call that was alluded to, discussed earlier. So details are still being finalized of who leaves it, you know, as Jeff said, gets left there, and now we have to take it from the edge of the driveway up. The contractor would, you know, will take it from there, you know, into the building. So I think we just need, we need a little bit more time on this before we recommend.
It's a big
recommend
dollar
the price.
amount, so.
It is. It is.
But it
So,
does,
yeah, I just think once you have feedback, if you need us to take action, I think that's just the direction I would like to go on this one, is once you're ready with feedback,
Absolutely.
and if we're causing a delay to the project and can't wait till November 2nd, that's what I just need to know, so that we can
is-
take action. Because remember, with all of these, we then have to take this to the Board of Selectmen. You know, we're just recommending. We have absolutely no authority to grant or sign, so. Mr. Goodney?
During the cost estimating, when we came up with our numbers, I think we allowed, $500,000 for this particular thing.
Yeah.
Does that, does the forecast of that $500,000, was this included in that? And was that an accurate
remember.
estimate? Or is it, when that number came to be?
Trying to rack my brain to remember what the
I can
engineer.
help you on that
so
one.
What did you
Um,
remember?
I remember, that wasn't a number Jeff came up with. If I recall, that was given to him by the DPW. It's
That's
much
right,
like
you're
the
right, yeah, I was trying to think of who told me that number.
utilities.
That's
So
right.
we are carrying 400,000, right? And as John mentioned, we're hearing design and construction sounds to be approximately 500,000. You're not gonna know for sure until you go out to bid on the construction.
Yeah,
But,
the estimate, the estimate back in February of 17 had $100,000 for gas and $400,000 for water.
so we're talking water right now,
Right.
not gas.
And just 78 for the plan.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta do a
Fine.
plan, but I think my
Okay, but
suggestion on this one is we just wait for further guidance. I think,
Yeah, just
We'd-
see if they can,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes task orders breeds a little complacency, and let's see what, you know, if we can get them to get the number a little
That number
more.
you gave us 6 months ago, we
little
want
more
to make
effective.
sure that's correct.
I just want to comment that their proposal does indicate, sounds like a 4-month duration from execution of the contract to completion of the construction phase. So if they did get cut loose sometime in November, I guess, we'd be looking at March or so, which would be before we would even execute the contract for the building project. So we've got time.
sounds like something we'll be discussing on November 2nd.
Add it to the list.
All right. So moving forward, in sequential order now are 3 change orders from context. The first 2 relate specifically to what we already authorized at the last meeting, related to septic, golf clubhouse design, and the third one will be dealing separately, deals with Woodward. So the total of the first one was $6,500, and the total of the second one was $22,000, for a total of $28,500. That theoretically are 2 items we've already approved, but I felt a responsibility of the committee that to just make sure you saw the items that were presented to Mr. Purple and will ultimately go to the Board of Selectmen. I don't know if you have any questions for Jeff on those numbers. I can speak for Vertex that they asked a lot of questions of Jeff's subcontractors to ensure that they understood what we were actually getting, and more importantly, make sure that there was no gotchas, that we're going to get another proposal in a month to say, oh, you know, we need to do this or we need to do that. So I think there was a few items that were clarified as part of that process that I think was very helpful. So I don't know if there's any questions on proposal 1 or 2. All right, so then proposal 3 is not part of our budget. It relates to the integration of the Woodward Traffic Circle. This would be a expense borne by the school committee, but given all the conversations that we've had, is our consultants would actually be doing the work so that we're providing a unified plan. This is an $8,000 item. There's no action for us to take on this one, other than I'm providing it to you as an FYI. So I think where that leaves us, actually, any questions on that? So I think where that leaves us is the only item we need to take action on is the first one, the septic, because we've already taken action on proposals 1 and 2. We're deferring further discussion on the water line design. So really, we just need to make a recommendation for or against the Board of Selectmen signing the change order related to the $8,360 for the extra perk testing.
That's already been done.
That's correct. We can certainly have discussion before any motions.
I just, you were trying to get this done rather quickly, and I think for whatever distaste there might be about maybe that happened without, you know, meeting, whatever, I'm all for it. The fact that it did get done, as much as people might have some concerns, and maybe what, it might be a little expensive, or not planned properly, or whatever those concerns might be. However, I think that's offset by the fact that it was done very quickly, and it's in keeping with our timeline. So I'm all for spending the money, that 8,000 or whatever it was, to get that done in the timely fashion. I mean, you didn't put it off and say, you know, hold it, we're gonna go back to the committee and wait another 2 weeks and talk about it some more. It was done. and we have a working septic that works with the golf course, it works with everything, I think that's a good thing. So I would like to make a motion, I guess, to pay that. Or whatever we have to do, recommend it, the
To
selectmen pay it,
recommend
or,
to the Board of Selectmen.
yeah.
Is there a second to Mr. Goodney's motion?
Second.
Is there any discussion, further discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? So carries. Any other questions on, I think, Jeff, I think a lesson learned on this one, though. No one gave you authority to perform this. And I think Vertex was still vetting this as late as 5 o'clock this afternoon. So I just think there needs to be better communication
Okay.
about, like, or if you have recommendations for how the process is gonna work, but we're paying a lot of money to Vertex
Right.
to be our project manager. We're required by law to have them. But, I think this was an oversight, and I think I've said that, but if you have any recommendations for us to avoid this going forward,
What I was gonna say is, we did, I think, notify, I'm not sure who Ellen copied, but I know we sent an email last week before this work was scheduled, notifying you of the situation and what we were intending to do. So what would help me, considering your statement, is if you could outline a process by which we should follow to accomplish your goals and the town's goals, we will definitely follow that, absolutely. So if you can tell me how you'd like us to proceed, we will proceed that way.
Because there are going to be more things that can't wait for the next PBC meeting. I agree with Jeff on that.
yeah, I mean,
No.
I think, unfortunately, if you send an email to me, I can't make a decision. I'm only one of 9. I just happen to have been elected the chairman, and Mr. Purple is not a non-voting member. So,
Is,
the goal is not to keep coming back with these proposals every 2 weeks, right? We asked you for 1 and 2, and there's no objections here, right? And I think everyone praised the work at the last meeting to rally around that to accomplish what we heard from Planning, Conservation, and Board of Health. This one, well, very small in the big picture, sets a very bad tone to the town that is looking over our shoulder saying, what are you doing approving all these things, right? We start talking about a water line, that might be $100,000. You start adding these things up, we cannot proceed on this route. So we can assemble a meeting in 48 hours if we have to. Maybe this committee can decide if there's a threshold that we want to just automatically send it to the Board of Selectmen and not have to have this committee meet, then the Board of Selectmen meet.
and it brings us into a good question for a little bit further down the road. When construction starts, we absolutely cannot wait for things that will come up. If we hit a rock, whoever's going to be in the field needs the ability to authorize removal of that rock. Otherwise, we're going to wait, even if it's for a Board of Selectmen meeting, we will shut the project down.
But that is something that's unforeseen that you don't know until you open up the ground, right?
Correct, but something will need a procedure in place.
Okay.
So- And I understand what the nuance, the difference between the two is right now. But it is something to give thought to as we get closer for the unanticipated things, because they will come up.
But you're empowered now. I mean, that's my feeling on your position, is that you're empowered to make those decisions with him, I think, from our standpoint, that's what he's on board for.
He's got to review the proposals. He can't
with-
authorize them. The
with-
Board
with
the Board of
this, so
Selectmen are
last
the only
week-
ones that can,
Right, but last week, we hit a speed bump and that you needed a decision. That's your empowerment to almost communicate with us or make that call.
Well, I guess that's what my question was, what's the process? I mean, I understand the design phase, we may have time on our side. So, what's the process by which, if we do hit an unforeseen issue, we resolve it? Communication that happens, which parties are involved in that communication, and ultimately, is it back to this group in a meeting, maybe off schedule, but, a meeting that's assembled to decide it? Is it Vertex giving us direction do they have the authority to do that? And then, of course, to John's point, definitely in construction, that process is probably too cumbersome, and it's gonna end up costing the town more money to follow. So there's gonna have to be a quicker process in place to handle something like that. And I don't know, I've never seen the OPM authorized to spend the town's money, so I'm assuming they're never gonna be authorized. So somebody obviously is the decision maker and has to be able to do that, and I think that's probably
In the,
what we'll need to define.
yeah, once we get to construction, most often, there's a person who's empowered to either come to the job meetings, or we bring, okay, look, I've got these 3 PCOs, $5,000, $6,000, and $7,000, are we good with it? And of course, you'll get the full presentation at the next PBC meeting. Here's what we did, here's why we had to,
Yeah.
here's why we had to get it going. That's different than a forward price change order of, hey, we'd like to add a door here. That's different, it's way out. He'll get it, we'll review it, we'll give it, we'll show it to you and say, okay, do you want to put the door in? That's different than the,
I think people are expecting stuff during construction.
mhm.
I don't think we were expecting as much during design. Maybe I'm naive, but that's just kind of where I'm sitting. I think if that's how you see it run in other communities, then our committee does not have the right charge. And that's something I can go back to the Board of Selectmen. We do not have any authority to authorize any spending. So we probably need to get a Board of Selectmen member there, or they need to delegate that responsibility to this committee to be able to help with that. I mean, I don't see any other ways around it unless there's.
What does the clerk of the works do once construction is underway? Give me a typical day in that person's job.
Report, that's us, not him. That person's there, eyes and ears, recording everything, man equipment, materials that show up on site, what's happened, convey any concerns that, hey, they maybe this looks wrong.
He's an observer.
Observer, let Jeff and Ellen know, hey,
So they hit a
Maybe he needs to
rock,
come
they hit
out.
a rock, the clerk of the works finds out, he calls you.
calling me
Call
or calling
Steve.
Steve. Yep.
What's the next step usually after that?
Usually it's a conversation between the OPM and the architect, how do we want to handle it? And if it's something that isn't really have any financial implications, but it's simply just a design issue or means and methods type thing, we might work with the contractor
there's a
directly and
financial
we'll
issue?
report it. If there's a financial issue, the two of us have to decide how is that going to get communicated,
No,
explained to the owner?
in other communities, how
Typically,
is
there's
that?
a threshold value.
But
There
typically,
is.
there's an
You know,
owner rep.
A man machine and a truck is $2,500,
Mhm.
$2,800. So anything that can be handled, typically it's a $5,000
5
to
or
$10,000, never more
10,000
than
usually.
10 of these things that come up, because obviously they need to be priced.
Right.
If it's something where, okay, get rid of the rock, we're using that example, well, we keep track of, it took them 2 hours, there was an excavator with a hammer on it, there was an hour, of the operator, there was an hour of a laborer, it's easy, X
So
times Y
the way
equals
that
Z.
you've seen it work in other communities, and I suspect what you are proposing is that someone, and whether it's you, John, I think it would be you, be given a certain threshold?
No.
No?
One
It's one of-
one
it's-
of you that I
it's-
could call to say, hey, I found this, are you good with this?
Okay.
Somebody on the
That's-
town's end, town building committee, board of selectmen, somebody that's charged with following the project closely and is authorized to spend, usually it's up to $5,000 or up to $10,000 on change orders that happen in the course of the work that can't wait for an official vote
Yep.
decision.
Well, Jason, I think you're right. We need to go back to find out. My sense is that the selectmen are probably not going to be the ones that want to be called on all these construction issues.
Because typically what we'll do is, propose change orders, those kind of things, forward price things, things that happen, we will bundle them together into a change order. It may have 5, 6, 7 items on it. That's the document that will go to the Board of Selectmen to say, that document will require signature. It will
But
contain some things
that's
that we're.
different, though, than
That's the
giving
sum of the
someone the
parts.
threshold, right?
So I'm
Okay.
talking about, once you've approved
Right.
me to do that,
Yep.
it still needs to be approved through a change order so that
Got
it
it.
can get on the contractor's requisition and he
Got
can
it.
bill, he
There
can
has
bill
to
for
be-
it.
There has to be a formal contract change, which is what the change order does. It changes the actual formal contract with the contractor, and that's the mechanism. But the authorization right there in the field to spend that $5,000 can happen before the formal change order
Got
is
it.
signed.
Right. My guess is there aren't that many of those issues that arise in the course of a construction project.
The job's out of the ground. That's the,
Yeah, it's usually in the
it's
ground
usually
stuff.
subsurface stuff.
Right.
Once it's out,
You
the plans are good. Sorry.
It's not too far
Little
away from
joke.
here.
Put it on the spot, isn't it?
Yeah, those problems are minimal.
But coming back to where we're at today, why was this one rushed then? Why was the?
It was the
warrant-
timing of the Conservation and Planning Board submissions, so that we could file those appropriately. We had to have the septic system design completed, so we needed a septic field location to design. So we were basically going up against the planned dates to submit those, and we knew that, you know, initially the driller submitted, or the digger submitted a date that he could come back to work, which was gonna be, you know, I think it was next week or something like that, before he could even show up, or maybe 2 weeks from now. So that initial date was sort of rejected because we said there's no way, once we did that test, that we could actually get all the documents done and submit properly. So we had them go back, find a different company that could do it today, and that's when we notified via email, I think it was Jason and Mark, just to say, this is the scenario, this is what we're facing. So, you know, understandably, maybe that wasn't the right way to do it, and we should have a different process in place, you know. If the process is, we have to have a meeting, so we
I
can
don't think we
present
have to
the
have it.
costs.
I guess, Mike, just to clarify, Mike, the reason I voted against it was not because you're trying to get the process done on the schedule, the aggressive schedule, is we already approved $1.4 million for your firm, and you're trying to nickel and dime us for $700 for the 10% oversight on that. That would be one of those items. I would have just said, hey, town, this is one thing we're taking on the chin. We're not taking responsibility. It was our fault. I get you're trying to run a business too. But this is just one of those things, when you look at the overall magnitude, that this is just something you should just presented, said this is what we're doing, instead of, you know, honestly, it was that 10% that got me. It wasn't the 7,000 from the third party.
Understood. That's absolutely not our intent. In all honesty, you know, absolutely not. That's not the way we run our business. It's not the way I do business. There's plenty of things that we absorb during the course of a project and you never even know about it. There's plenty of things that we do as part of what we feel are a high quality of services that we provide that will, I think, hopefully establish that value.
So, I didn't see this 10% early, so you're charging us 10% for your management time. What was your management time?
I'm willing to waive it. I don't think there's reason to
Okay.
have a fight about it,
Yeah,
frankly.
I was just,
I mean, I can explain it, there's things that we have to do, but, I mean, Jason's right. If that's adding insult to injury here, I'm willing and perfectly happy to get rid of it. I guess, clearly, it's a problem, so, I mean, there's things.
Insofar as you understand the atmosphere within which we're operating, and, you know, town meeting has authorized the town to spend X amount of money with the hope, perhaps, maybe even the expectation, that we can come in under budget. So I think at every step of the process, we're going to be looking for ways, and it's not necessarily something that is going to be negative against you, but that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking for ways to do this. And we're not talking about a lot of money here, but at least we're going to be setting the tenor, if you will, moving
Sure.
forward, so you know.
I respect that, definitely.
Do you have anything to say, or can we?
I just as a point, when we put this project forward, there was some kind of a number that when you delay it a year, it was some astronomical number.
$750,000 a year.
So monthly, I know you're very good with the numbers, what would that be monthly?
Divide by
$750,000 divided by 12? I mean, if we put that off a month, it's a considerable amount of money that we would be losing.
My
No,
problem
I-
is not with the speed they're working.
You know, I'm just want to put that point out. I mean, if somebody takes it on the chin to
It's not the
save
delay,
us,
yeah.
you know, I don't know how much money that would be, 80,000, I don't know. But, you know, I think that's a good thing.
So let me ask you this, Jason, and again, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but the work has already been performed. I think it would be best that if we could make a unanimous recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and if they're waiving their management fee, would it make sense to vote again, or am I just going up the wrong,
I don't think the fact that I voted against it should, there's 7 other very competent people here. I work in consulting for a living. And it just, we approved $28,000. John asked some very good questions. We approved that. When we had the expectation, it was probably gonna be 10 to 15. We didn't blink an eye. So it's just, I thought that was the right.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
but
I just think
wanted-
it's,
yeah.
again, I think to use your words, setting the tenor for
Yep.
what's ahead, because we know that there's some rough patch that we're gonna hit. We just don't know when it is, how much it's gonna be, and I don't wanna be looking back at some of these early decisions saying, gosh, why did we do that? Anything else on that topic?
I would like to speak to the overall budget. We're gonna absorb design for golf course stuff that's gonna run us up higher in some of our site work numbers, I think. So what is our 22.5? What did we leave town meeting with?
22.6.
22.6. I think that's gonna start to creep up as we're absorbing more of this
I
golf
think
course
hopefully
site work cost.
This is it.
This is it.
This
yeah,
is design
this is it.
cost. We're talking about design
Design.
cost.
Yeah, this is it.
22.6 is going up once we start incorporating all this in their documents
No,
and bidding that
no.
out. That's what that's what we're talking about doing here.
That's gonna be a separate, no.
We're bringing it into our project. I mean,
No, we can't,
Unless we
no,
have 2 plans, but
how are we not?
no. So
We
to
didn't
be
get money for
clear,
it. We didn't get money for it.
to be clear, design is included because it is inhibiting our ability to get through the regulatory process. Construction is not included. That's a separate journey that the town is gonna have to take.
Then somehow we have to find a line, right?
And I think, quite honestly, the plan should be, if the town does seek that funding, that the town should be made aware of the 28,000 that was expended and decide whether they put that as part of the article to reclass the expense. But we're not gonna get through the regulatory process if we don't consider the contiguous needs. And let's be fair to the school committee, they have stepped up to the plate very quickly to absorb the other part of the cost. The problem with the golf committee is they quite honestly are just getting up and running, and we certainly couldn't wait for them to get all of their ducks and plans in a row to delay our process. So design is included, construction is not.
When we do the cost estimate, we'll separate phase 1 out,
Yeah.
so it's identifiable.
What they are, right? What it is, right?
Mr. Rooney, do you have any updates from the golf course committee?
Well, there are 2 RFPs out, one for contract management services to operate the golf course once the existing contract expires, and the other one is for the architect that we were talking about, the architect to talk about moving the first tee and the 9th green, and then also perhaps long-range issues affecting the golf course. Those, I know one is ready to go out, hasn't gone out yet. The other one has gone out, and Mark has received some information back. I don't know anything more about that in terms of what has come back or that nature. One thing that I think we're going to have to discuss, and I'm not sure how we go about this, but the construction costs are separate from the 22.6. The construction costs would include, I suspect, the parking lot, the relocation of the clubhouse, right? I mean, those would be construction costs. So the golf course committee has no money. So is that something that has to go to town meeting in April? Or, I just don't know the timing
I think
there.
that ball remains with Mr. Purple and bond counsel.
Okay.
I think that's an item we should continue, just given the dialogue over the last 5 minutes. There should be some clarity around, especially if there is a special town meeting that creeps up in November.
So, Jason, just so that I can report back to the golf course committee, I'm not sure I understood what you just said. The issue as to the costs associated with the golf course, we call it renovation, is an issue that bond council is evaluating as to whether or not it comes within the 22.6?
I think there's pieces to the puzzle, right? There's a lot of pieces to the
Mhm.
puzzle. I don't know where those lines have been
Right.
drawn, but I think Mr. Purple needs to provide us with,
Okay,
in your committee,
yes,
um,
all right.
very clear guidance on that, because I don't know that any of us up here should be speculating.
Okay, I
Let's-
appreciate that.
Is there anything our committee can do at this point other than provide that direction?
The only thing that we suggested at our last meeting earlier this week is that we think it would make sense, we meaning the committee. I'm not a member of the committee, I'm a liaison. So the committee thought it would make sense for us to start to generate a little bit more neighbor involvement, and whether that be by way of a press release from the Board of Selectmen, because it's been half a year since town meeting, so a press release indicating, you know what, where we're at here, what we've accomplished, and so the neighbors would know. I understand you're gonna have a neighbor invitation for our next meeting, so that addresses that in large part, but I do think something should go out, not necessarily from this committee or the golf course committee, but from the Board of Selectmen saying, listen, you gave the town $22.6 million, let's tell you where we're at, and how we got there, and where we plan to go. That was one suggestion that came out of that committee.
So is your chair sending that email or request to the Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen? Or
so it's not my chair, because I'm not on that committee.
I got it, sorry.
But John, do you remember, as Mr. Boland, do you remember, was Lou going to send that request to the Board of Selectmen?
It was, Kevin was gonna draft the, press release. And then the take, once he gets that out, I'm gonna take it from there.
Okay, I'll clarify that.
Okay, if you need any support, just let me know.
Mhm.
So, not that we haven't talked enough about budgets tonight, but we are now going to get regular invoices from our friends at Vertex and Context on a monthly basis. The process is going to be that our committee will review and understand those, Mr. Purple will sign them, and the invoices will be paid. I think it's best when you're all here, we can just discuss them. The meetings won't always line up on a monthly basis. That, for example, the invoices that you have in front of you now, Vertex is a little dated. It's a month and a half ago at this point, because it's dated September 1st. And then Context is dated October 4th, so it's a little more recent, but if you think about the timeline of when each firm was engaged. So the first one is a invoice from Vertex for $2,342.50. There's detail behind it. I will just state this for the record, that I've asked Mr. Lemieux and Mr. Theron to beef up their descriptions other than project management on their bills going forward. Just, I think a lot of it's very clear when they spend 4 hours with us together. That's Public Safety Building Committee meeting. I just think that that's good guidance that we should have, and for any of us that do that on a daily basis already. You know, we're paying you rates an hour, so they've been very amenable to that. They've already taken action for their October bill to do that. So I don't know if there's any questions for Mr. Lemieux or Mr. Theron on their invoice. Is there a motion to approve the invoice as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Any discussion?
Can I, again, sorry, just getting this now. The last page,
That's not ours.
that's not
There's
yours.
a second invoice in there.
Whose is this last page?
Context.
Okay, I'll wait for you then to. Sorry.
Any discussion on Vertex? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, next bill, a little more. Context Architecture dated October 4th, 2017. Total amount of $108,000. with $12.17 of expenses. To summarize, for those that don't have it, essentially it's broken down as $78,000 out of their $260,000 of design development budget, and $30,000 for survey and geotech out of their total $40,000. I'll just remind the committee, the context is on a fixed fee. So it's really just going to be questions about expenses and questions about percentage of progress. I'm not really sure that there's any other questions to ask. You know, however many hours they're incurring, that's kind of their business based on the way that the contract is written. So that's my view. Any questions? I know Mr. Rooney was very anxious.
No, just looking for an explanation, that's all,
Of the
So-
last page.
of the zip car. Why is there so many zip car charges?
Well, the last page is a copy of essentially a credit card statement that shows a lot of different projects that are not yours. And the one, it's not highlighted here, but the one that is this project there's only one charge. I believe it's for tolls associated with the project. It's within this matrix of
Okay,
numbers and
I would ask, moving forward, you just give us the expense that is associated with our project rather than your credit card statement, if that's possible.
Well, it's just the backup. The expense is actually on the front sheet. This is just simply a sheet showing that it actually was incurred to the credit card. If you want us, we can highlight it, or,
Well, my question was
leave
gonna
it
be
out.
about the zip cars, but now I don't have the question, so. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
I mean,
sure.
Well, if you have a question about it, my guess is we're gonna have a zip car expense on the next bill. So I would throw it out there now if there's a question.
well, tell me about the zip car. Are we gonna,
It was just the tolls. There was no actual zip cars itself.
No, I know, but will we have a zip car expense in the
I don't
future?
believe so. I'm pretty sure there's no, I'm looking at you, but
Look at me.
I'm pretty
Look
sure
at
there's
your
no
contract.
reimbursable expenses on our contract, you know, for travel. So I don't think there's any, I don't think there's
so-
any,
So we don't expect that
I don't-
there'll be zip cars billed as an expense?
I rarely am able to charge for, travel,
Yeah.
zip cars. Almost nobody gives me that expense. It used to be a regular occurrence.
Mhm.
Architects would get travel costs, phone charges, the whole thing, and nobody ever wants to do that anymore. So it's usually gone. It doesn't appear, so,
obviously, one client of yours is still paying for it.
well, well, you're not paying for any of the other cars, because I can definitely tell you that line item would have been, hundreds of dollars if it was.
No, I'm
zip
saying
cars.
that at least one of your client is still
Oh,
willing
yeah.
to pay for the zip card.
No, most of them are internal, we just, most of those we're absorbing.
So we don't need to spend any more time
Okay.
on this.
Are there any further questions of context on their invoice? Is there a motion to approve such invoice as presented?
I make a motion to approve.
Is there a second to Mr. Goodney's motion?
Second.
Mr. Moorhead seconded. Any discussions?
One question. Moving forward, are we gonna get an allocation as to how many hours you spend during each invoice period? And the reason I ask is at the end of the project, if you come in over the budget amount, how do we then determine how many hours you've spent on the project?
That's the good and the bad of a fixed fee. The good is, you don't pay extra when I go over the amount of hours I budgeted for the project. The bad is, of course, if I am so efficient with my time and do such a great job, you also don't reap the benefits of that. But I will tell you, it's
Ever gone
fairly rare that we're not going over budget on
Right.
the amount of time we spend on a fixed fee.
Yep.
So so we don't have hours shown here because it's irrelevant, essentially. If
Got
we
it.
do a contract change that is an hourly, we will identify that,
Okay.
and then we will show hours, but that's also fairly
Fair enough.
rare.
Fair enough.
Any further questions? We have a motion on the table. It's been seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Any other business or public comment? Seeing none, is there?
No, just leave it
Oh.
as-
Just quick, sorry, Mimi Latrell, 19 Oregon Road. Is there any way to get the documents that you discuss at your meeting scanned with your agendas?
They're gonna be posted to the town's website.
But they're not there. Like, it's hard to follow the meetings when you're discussing things that,
So
That-
are you suggesting we post that ahead of time, kind of like when we post our agenda?
yeah, like the Board of Selectmen does and the Planning Board does, so
We can do
people who
that.
are either watching or here can follow along and know what you're talking about.
We don't always have it 48 hours in advance, but we can certainly add an addendum to it once.
Yeah.
Get it?
Thank you.
Thank you. There any other business the committee wants to conduct? A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? We are adjourned.